thee, O Lord, my strength and my salvation. Amen. Would you please be seated? I just wanted to check one of the facts before I begin my sermon. I thought Nina was going to have her first solo this week, but it's next week. So if you see a plane up in the sky, that will be Nina Yon and all by herself. But next week, folks, not this week. Oh my. I am spoiled for choice today. I am so very excited because we have 3 opportunities for such wonderful gospel and Bible readings. The old, the new, and the gospel. I could do an hour on each night just be getting started. No, but seriously, we've got this wonderful reading from Jeremiah. Have you ever felt alone? Totally alone? Nobody cares. The world hates you. The world's against you. You're nobody and nothing in a meaningless cosmos. Well, Jeremiah is for you. Because before you were even born, the Lord knew you. He follows you. He loves you. You are part of the plan for His word. You are never alone. And I could go on that line for 45 minutes. I could take our gospel reading. Jesus has just returned from the temptations in the wilderness, and He has gone to His hometown. And the first thing He's done in His hometown is go to the synagogue. The synagogue? Why the synagogue? Isn't the synagogue the place of corruption and false teaching and fake religion? Yes, it is. But Jesus goes there nonetheless. So what does that tell us? Just because you may think that your denomination is going to hell in a handbasket doesn't mean you better run away. You are called to share the good news of God no matter where you are, if people are there to listen. And it goes on by Jesus saying that the words of Isaiah, the prophecy, are fulfilled in me. I am the Messiah. I am the one God is sending in the world to change everything. And the Jews became angry because He's blasphemed. And then He doubled down by saying, look whom God has used in the past. There was leprosy in the land. And who did God cure? Naaman the Syrian. And there's famine in the land. And there's drought. And to whom did God come? Zephyrah, the woman from Zion. Foreigners. What is Jesus telling us right now? That the old way, that the Jewish way, that you had to be born this way, that you had to be the right color, the right class, the right language, is over. That all people are loved by God, no matter who they are. Oh, but friends, that's such a powerful reading for me, but I just have to speak about our epistle. If you will, the love epistle. Most people hear this when they go to weddings. Brides are given a choice of readings, and they almost always choose this. Love is patient, love is kind, love is gentle. And it's a wonderful reading, but you know, it's got nothing to do with marriage. It sounds pretty in English, but there's more to it than that's going on. But it's not wrong for a wedding. But it is not right for the way most people think. And I want to talk to you about love. Because folks, I finally get it. I finally understand what God's plan is, what purpose is, what I should do today. And that is love. Now, love has got, for me, in my time, in my generation, a bad name. Love is all you need. Yeah. It's a Beatles song. Love is soppy romanticism. Love is just do it. It's the Nike commercial, but it's so far from that I want to talk to you about love. And I'm going to go through this passage, and I want you to hear what the Lord is saying through Paul in his letter to the Corinthians. It begins, and Paul is writing, if I speak in tongues of mortals and of angels. Now what is Paul saying? If I come to you, the most well-educated, the most polished priest, you've got a Yale man in your presence. With 7 years of graduate education. If I speak to you with all the knowledge and training and skill and polish that I have, but if I have no love, I'm wasting your time. If I speak to you in the language of angels, Meaning, if God has given to me the charism of tongues, that if I'm speaking to you in words that are angelic, that the demonstration of God's power is being made manifest through me right now. But if I have no love, what am I? A noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. I'm just wasting your time. I can possess education. I can possess the charism of the Holy Spirit. But if there is no love in what I'm saying, I'm wasting your time. If I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith so as to move mountains, but if I have no love, I have nothing. If God so blessed me that I had such power that I'd lay my hands on Alan right now and he'd stand up and do cartwheels down the aisle, Ruth would be surprised. If I were Jimmy Swaggart or Oral Roberts and I could perform miracles just before you all, but if I had no love, what does Paul say? I am nothing. What is this love? Is it all you need? Yeah. McCartney and Beatles? No, it's not. See, love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. The Greek has 4 words for love. Philia, like Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. I'm from there. I know it's not true, but it still means philios, fraternal love, the love of brotherhood, the brotherhood of man, the brotherhood of believers, the brotherhood of fellowship. There's eros, romantic or sexual love. That's what most brides think when love is patient. The love, the emotion, the joy I feel for you right now. That's true, but that's not the word Paul is using. There's love. There's the love of a man for a fine cigar, a love of a man for his dogs, or fine cars, and all that stuff. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the Greek word is agape. It's the love of God made manifest in how you live your life. That love is not boastful or rude or envious. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in the wrong, but rejoices in the truth. That love, the love of God, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. What is that love? That love is how you and I are called to live right now, today. February 3rd, that's today's date. On the cover of your bulletin, we have a chapel window. I think it's the U.S. Army Chaplains College. I think that's in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, if I'm not mistaken. There's this the window of the 4 chaplains. What are the 4 chaplains? Well, February 3rd, 1943, an incident occurred in the war, the Great War, that involved 4 chaplains. In 1943, the U-boat war was at its height. It was very dangerous. We had not developed the technology to beat back the German submarine or U-boat offensive. And we were beginning to ship troops to Europe to begin the Great Crusade to destroy and defeat the Nazis. And in 1943, a ship loaded in Boston Harbor, the SS Dorchester. And the SS Dorchester was a former cruise ship that would go down from New York, Boston, Philadelphia to the Caribbean, Havana, and come back up. 300 passengers, 200 crew. War breaks out, and it's converted into a troop ship. The military, the Navy, and the Army requisitioned the passenger liners and knocked out all the first-class cabins and built bunks. And the reason why they did this was because the passenger liners were the fastest ships afloat. They were faster than a submarine's torpedo. They were faster than a U-boat. They could, the Queen Elizabeth, not the QE2, but the first one, would cross the Atlantic all by itself because it was the fastest ship afloat. And it couldn't be touched. Well, 3 troop ships were loaded in Boston Harbor, and the Dorchester, which oddly enough is a district in Boston, was loaded with a division Division from the Massachusetts National Guard. They have been training in Fort Miles Standish, I think it is. I don't know where that is anymore, but I assume it's in Massachusetts. Now, who was in the National Guard in 1942 and 43? 18, 19-year-old boys straight from high school, boys from the factory floor, boys from the shop, boys from the farm, plus men in their late 30s running away from their wives. These are not regulars. These are not career soldiers. These are not the old sweats. These are citizen soldiers who have had a few months training and are going to be sent off to fight the good fight. And as that ship was loading, they were given 4 chaplains who had been sent straight from the chaplain school at Harvard University. Yes, God can be present at Harvard, but in various ways. And the story starts out like one of my dumb jokes. There was a priest, a rabbi, and 2 ministers, but they didn't walk into a bar. They walked onto the Dorchester. And these 4 men were all in their late 30s, early 40s. They had been ministers, priests, rabbi in civilian life, serving congregations. And when the war broke out, they answered the call, and they left their homes. The 3 men, the 2 ministers and rabbi were married, and they had children. They all left their families, and they joined the colors to serve. And after their training at Harvard Divinity School in Army chaplaincy, they were assigned to the Massachusetts National Guard Division as chaplains. And so they met the men for the very first time as they're boarding the ship. And the ship takes off, and the Dorchester was one of a convoy of 3 other passenger liners carrying troops, escorted by 3 Coast Guard cutters. And on the night of February 3rd, they were in the Labrador Sea, which is up near Greenland, between Iceland and Greenland and the island of Labrador and Finland, that area. And the air temperature was 32 and the ocean temperature was 34. And the Coast Guard cutters had a sonar echo. Sonar had just been introduced into the Navy, and they were able to locate submarines. So the 3 Coast Guard cutters are sending off these, if you see the old World War II movies, the pings. But if you've got more than one doing it, you can, by triangulation, locate the submarine. So the Coast Guard cutters, they have a sounding, and they begin to do their routine to close on this submarine. And the 3 passenger liners were told, take off, full speed, head to Europe, we'll take care of the submarine. But the Nazis were clever, as they always are in old movies. There's a wolf pack, meaning a whole array of submarines, and they sent one of their own to decoy the 3 Coast Guard cutters, who began to search for the one submarine, while the rest of the submarines were fanned out, waiting for the 3 troop ships. And about 3 in the morning, the Dorchester took 2 torpedoes. And the torpedoes hit just in front of the engine room, wiping out, shutting down the electricity for the troop ship. And the troop ship, the men were asleep in their bunks, and the ship began to sink, and the power is off, and the plates begin to buckle. 18, 19-year-old boys, many of whom, this is the first time out of Boston, let alone out of the country. And they're in a ship that is going down, and is going down fast, and panic breaks out. And the 4 chaplains are put in a lifeboat because they're educated, they've got families, they're important. The chaplains see the turmoil, and they get out of the lifeboats. And with the NCOs, they try to restore order. They get the men to line up. They go below to help the men get out of the trapped, open the bulkhead doors, get them on deck. The ship is going down. The boys are panicking. The chaplains take off their life jackets. You can't find yours, take mine. The ship is sinking so rapidly that the lifeboats towards the stern are already underwater. They can't be released. So there's not enough space in the lifeboat. You take my place. And the ship begins to sink. And the inquiry that was held recorded the testimony of some of the survivors, saying that the 4 chaplains were last seen
at the very bow of the ship, as it began to sink beneath the waves, the four men arm in arms are praying, and the survivors could hear funny languages, Hebrew, Latin, and English, as the four men go beneath the waves. And they die. Why did they die? They were given priority seating. They're important. They're educated men. They have a job to do. They're not some 18-year-old mechanic from South Boston. They're not a nobody. They're somebodies. If they chose a priest, a rabbi, and two ministers, chose to give their lives so that others might live. They stayed with their men. 600 men died that night because there were not enough lifeboats, and even if you had a life jacket, because the water was 34 degrees, hypothermia would take you in just a few minutes. But their sacrifice is exactly what Paul is talking about in his epistle. Loving your neighbor, giving of yourself utterly, not for you, but for God's word. Friends, Christ calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's not some namby-pamby, be nice to small children and animals talk. That is love your neighbor. What does Paul go on to write? He goes on to say, don't argue. Bear all things. People can be wrong. People can be evil. People can be stupid. Are you going to convince them of their stupidity by being bitter or harsh or mean and telling them how dumb they are? No, you are going to show them the light by loving them, by treating them as you would have them treat you, treating your neighbor as yourself. These are the clear words of Christ, and there's no getting around it. We are not to be mean, to be cruel, to be dismissive, to be egotistical. We are to give, and give to the utmost. Not this past weekend, but the weekend before, I was up on Saturday conducting my wife's stepfather's funeral. Ed died after a long, happy life. He's in his early 90s. And Susan's father died when she was 8. And her mother remarried Ed when she was about 15. And then I came along and took her away when she was 19, so. But Ed's been around a good long time, and I never knew her father. My parents had met her father in I think a dinner dance or at a bridge party once, but I never knew him. And his name was Bob Baxter. Susan's 6 feet tall, as you know. Bob was 6'7". That's why Susan's 6 feet tall. Bob was, I never knew him. And as we were up in Pennsylvania, we're sort of helping Susan's mother get ready for the move. Her husband has died, so what happens next? She moves to a smaller place. And we're sort of helping pack up, and Susan's mother gives Susan these little boxes, old little boxes. And she said, you may want these, and they're Bob's decorations. And Susan knew about her father, but didn't know much about her father, because her father died when she was 8, and her mother never really waxed eloquent. She'd tell funny stories and stuff, but she didn't know her father. Well, Bob, in 1948, went to Princeton, New Jersey to play basketball. 6'7" in 1948, you're going to play basketball, so nice. And Bob went to college, and he played basketball, and he drank. And he had a great time. But he had a terrible academic record. And the Korean War breaks out meantime, and Bob's advisors say, Bob, you are not going to make it through this place. You've got to get your head screwed on straight. Bob, here's your opportunity. Take the time now, enlist, do the good thing, and when the war's over, come back, finish your education, get your degree. So Bob dropped out of Princeton, joined the Marine Corps, and Bob was what they called in those days a 90-day wonder. By an act of Congress, he became a gentleman and an officer at the age of 19, and Bob was shipped off to Korea. And Bob got to Korea at a wonderful time. MacArthur, the U.S. Army, had just landed at Incheon, and the U.S. Army and the Marines and the British Army were driving north, and the Korean Army were driving north. Korea has a mountain range in the middle, and there are plains on the east coast and the west coast. And the Marines were on the east coast, and the ROK, Republic of Korea troops, and the U.S. Army were on the west coast, and they drove all the way up to the north. And Bob was a member of the U.S. 1st Marine Division. And Bob reached the Chosun Reservoir. The Chosun Reservoir is a man-made lake built by the Japanese as a reservoir on the border of China. And just before Thanksgiving Day in 1950, I think it was, the Chinese invaded. And 1 million Chinese troops crossed the border, the entire border, and there are 10,000 U.S. Marines. Now, there were probably about 150,000 Chinese troops, and the Chinese began the attack, driving the U.S. Army south and the Marines south. And the Marines were told to hold on, to hold fast so that we could withdraw our troops down both sides of the peninsula to a line prepared, what is now the DMZ. That line was not divided by diplomats, that was a military line that was defensible. While we reinforce the DMZ, hold fast, and then we'll evacuate you by sea. And began the assault by the Chinese on the 1st Marine Division and the retreat from the Yalu River, the retreat from Chosun Reservoir. I never knew Bob, and Susan's mother began to open up about him a bit and told me things that I didn't know. Bob had a difficult life after the war. And she would tell me Bob was one of the last casualties of the Korean War. Bob suffered from what we would now call PT, post-traumatic stress disorder. They called it shell shock in those days. Bob hated two things, sneakers and bugles. What's it with sneakers and bugles? The Chinese did not issue boots to their troops. They issued sneakers. And the Chinese did not use radios. They used bugles. And for Bob, the sound of sneakers brought back memories of the nights where the Chinese, they were on hills and the platoon would be dug in, and thousands upon thousands of Chinese would rush forward with their little sneakers, patting on the stones with the bugle calls. And they would come up and try to breach the line, and the hand-to-hand fighting would ensue in the trenches. In one of those nights, while the Chinese are about to come across the top of the hill, Bob and his platoon, 8, 9, 10 other little boys, I would call them, 18, 19-year-old Marines, a grenade is tossed into the dugout. And Bob pushed his men aside and threw himself on top of the grenade. And it went off. And he was severely wounded. And they beat off the attack, and Bob was carried by his men in a stretcher down to the sea and was evacuated. Bob never played basketball again for Princeton. And Bob could be 6'7", or he could be 6'2", however long he wanted to extend his legs, because Bob was severely injured. And Bob, I was handed, Susan was given his Purple Heart, and I think it was a Bronze Star. And Bob never recovered. Bob would have nightmares of the Chinese coming across the hillside. The bugles and sneakers would sort of send him off. And finally, when he was about 40, he couldn't take it, and he took his own life. Bob, if you will, is one of the last men who died in the Korean War from the injuries he sustained. And I talked to Susan's mother, and I said, "Did Bob ever talk about that?" She said, "No, he never, ever talked about the war. It was like pulling teeth." And in fact, they only knew a lot about Bob because he actually was filmed in a newsreel, being carried, being lifted up by a crane and dropped in a true ship. There is my father. But she did ask Bob, was it worth it? Was it worth it? Why didn't you let Jethro from Arkansas, jug-headed Marine private, why didn't you let him be the hero? Why did you? Who's in that trench? Who's in that dugout? Boys, black, white, yellow, brown, 18, 19-year-old from across the country, and a Princeton man who would go on to Harvard Law School and make a career of himself. Who's the most important man in that dugout? Bob is, the officer. Would you do it again? Bob said, absolutely. Now, the words Bob learned at Officer Candidate School, honor, duty, courage, they all probably played a part. But what really motivated Bob, why did you do that, Bob? A love of the men given under his charge. That is the love Paul is talking about. That is the love the four chaplains displayed. It was a conscious decision to give of themselves utterly so that others might live. And friends, it's not just old war stories I'm talking about. As I look across this congregation, I see three women, I'm not going to point, who have nurtured husbands with Alzheimer's disease, who have gone so far past the point where other people would just run away. They are fighting the good fight. They are being faithful even though there's not going to be a cure. There's not going to be a happy ending. There's not going to be smiles and roses at the end. They are there because they love their husbands. And we're not talking about eros. We're talking about agape. They are there out of duty, out of love, because this is what the Lord requires of them. And it is what the Lord requires of you and me. We have to be there. Men my age, this is about the time we start looking at expensive sports cars and younger women. We have our midlife crises. But guess what? You don't do that because you have a commitment to your wife, to your family, to the people whom God has given you to trust and to care for. And I don't care how much you want that car. That is not God's call on your life. This man right here. Now, we're not going to talk sports cars. He was a Florida highway patrolman for how long? 25, 30 years?
No, I started there. I became deputy.
You're ruining the sermon, okay? Ron could have made an awful lot more money doing different things in life. Ron and his daughter Kim and his son-in-law Marco, and now Christian, would get up every morning, put on that badge, buckle on that belt, and go out and stand in the line for you and me. Not knowing whether it's some dumb little traffic stop, some guy pulls a gun and kills him or not. Why do they do this? Did you do it for the money? I'm glad to hear that, otherwise you are a dumb guy. Why did Ron, why did Kim, why did Marco? No, he's not here. Why did Christian do this? Because of the love of God in their hearts being lived out in the Word. Friends, this is the call for each and every one of you. We're not all going to be soldiers. We're not going to wind up in a hilltop in Korea. We're not going to wind up in a cruiser in the middle of the night in a bad neighborhood. But we are going to be in life situations where we'll be given a choice of the easy route and the hard route. I am very tempted to look up that assisted living place in Washington State for my parents and ship them from Lecanto to Washington State and see them on Christmas and New Year's. That would be wonderful. But it's not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to love, is to, what does Paul say? Bear all things. You have responsibilities to not only to yourself, but to your fellow men and women. The opposite of Christianity is what I call Frank Sinatra Christianity. Or the Nike shoe commercial. I gotta be me, I gotta be free. Or as the commercial says, just do it. Meaning, do what your temperament, do what strikes you, do what the world thinks is great and important and vital. That is the exact opposite of what the Christian is called to do. The Christian is called to forbearance, meaning you don't have to be right in every argument. You have to be kind. That doesn't mean you're a doormat and you roll over. That doesn't mean anybody comes down the pike with a stupid idea, you gotta go, oh, isn't that lovely? No, it means you treat them with love and dignity and act to them as Christ would act to them. What did Christ do when he came to his hometown? He did not go to one side to the elect and say, okay, only the smart, good people now come and hear me preach. He went to the synagogue, the seat of church corruption. What are we called to do? Oh, the Episcopal Church has done something stupid. They're always going to do something stupid. You can count on that. Are we called to run away? No. We're called to love and be faithful and to be kind. This is not easy. This is hard. I would rather be right. Seriously, I would like the end of the argument to be, I'm right, you're wrong. Does that appear in the Bible in any single place? It does not. It says Christ called us to love our enemies. Paul tells us to be forbearing, to be kind, to be loving. Friends, this is hard stuff, but this is the Christian gospel. We are there for each other. What does that mean? Practical terms, we look out for each other at Shepherd of the Hills. Not because we can, but because we must. We care for our families. We put our own desires second behind our responsibilities. We are good citizens. We pay our taxes, even though we may think it's a total waste of money. And it is. But we are good citizens, and we render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar. Do you know why? Because we render unto God the things that are God. And what's God? My soul, your soul. And that's where we're supposed to go. Totally one with the Father, following Christ in all things, putting Him first in our heart. And if He died on that cross so that you and I might have eternal life, what do you think we're supposed to do? Just sit back and say, what have you done for me lately? We are to go out. Whether it's like the four chaplains, whether it's like Ron Sorensen, to be there for the stranger, for our friend, for our family. This is the call of Christ. And this is what I get about our Bible readings today. Amen. Friends,